The following is an excerpt from the testimony of Carl Stanley, owner of the Roatan Institute of Deep Sea Exploration and an experienced submersible operator, at a hearing before the U.S. Coast Guard's Marine Board of Investigation in 2023.
When we went out, it was Stockton, myself, sonar technician for a third-party supplier, I believe, and his duty was something like calibrating the sonar. And then it was a friend of Stockton from childhood who was, I believe, the COO on the company. And he told us to be prepared for noises. And he had recently done the solo dive on his own and basically just said, you know, this is going to make noise and brace yourselves. Please. So there were 4 of us in there. And in retrospect, there were a lot of red flags that now, after the implosion and learning more and putting different pieces of the puzzle together, start making sense and are kind of clues. We could have easily gone a little deeper, and that would have been a better test. But I think that was an indication of his lack of faith in that vessel. And when we got down there, he didn't do any of the driving in my recollection. He immediately, I believe I was the first one to drive, but he basically insisted, it was his idea, nobody asked to drive, had each of us drive. And I think that was his kind of sick way of, if we had imploded, we were a little bit in control of our own destiny, because when we were driving, we were needing to go towards deeper water the idea was really we were trying to get to the exact depth of the Titanic to confirm the hull was safe for that depth. You know, he knew at that point what the cross-section of the hull looked like. He knew that his engineer had quit, that would refuse to go in it, that the Lockridge was refusing. I didn't know any of these things. So we got down there and it's making noises that, the sound of a carbon fiber band breaking when it's in a 5-inch matrix is a lot of energy being released. And we were all clearly a little disnerved, but he had warned us, and the cracking sounds would amplify when you got deeper. And at some point, I don't remember who, we were all like, well, that's probably close enough. We've been down here long enough. And we went back up. And what I wrote him in the emails, and which is even more concerning than the cracking sounds that happened on the way down or while we were at the bottom, is that there was a kind of like a grand finale of cracking sounds as we were getting close to the surface, which I'm not a carbon fiber expert, but just thinking about it logically, the only way that you get a whole lot of more cracking when you're coming back up is that material degraded so much that it stored energy that was then released as the pressure was released. And, that's what I wrote him in the email. I realize what I'm going to say kind of is, I expect objections from OceanGate's counsel, and I would wish that you would indulge me a few minutes to lay out what I think about this, seeing that OceanGate came very, very close to killing me and has had a severe impact on my business as well as an entire industry. The definition of an accident is something that happened unexpectedly and by sheer chance. There was nothing unexpected about this. This was expected by everybody that had access to a little bit of information. And I think that if it wasn't an accident, it then has to be some degree of crime. And if it's a crime, I think to truly understand it, you need to understand the criminal's motive. And I think the entire reason this whole operation started was Stockton had a desire to leave his mark on history. He was living in the shadow of 250 years of historically significant figures. He knew that eventually it was going to end like this, and he wasn't going to be held accountable, but he was going to be the most famous of all his famous relatives.
Part 2, and the conclusion of the OceanGate Titan Submersible, a preventable tragedy, today on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Hello and welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, Tales of Mishaps, Misfortune, and Misadventure. I'm your host, Rich Napolitano. This is part 2 and the conclusion of the OceanGate Titan Submersible, a preventable tragedy. In part 1 of this series, you heard of Stockton Rush's background, the creation of OceanGate, and the early development of the Titan Submersible. You also heard numerous examples of OceanGate ignoring numerous warnings from industry experts, and from OceanGate's Director of Marine Operations, David Lockridge. When we left off, a crack in Titan's hull had recently been discovered, and the sub could no longer dive deep enough to reach the Titanic. OceanGate needed a new carbon fiber pressure hull, further delaying the launch of its Titanic expeditions. OceanGate continued expeditions using the now derated Titan at shallower depths, as well as their other submersibles, including Antipodes and Cyclops 1. A new carbon fiber hull was needed to rebuild Titan, and the company made an agreement with NASA to design, build, and test a 1/3 scale model carbon fiber hull. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, NASA facilities were shut down for many months. Ultimately, NASA engineers only served in an advisory role, providing remote consultation and guidance about carbon fiber composite. OceanGate subsequently turned to 2 firms to build its scale model: Electro Impact, which laid the carbon fibers, and Janicki Industries, which cured the material in its ovens. The scale model was delivered to OceanGate in May of 2020 and was tested at the University of Washington Applied Physics Lab. The carbon fiber scale model hull imploded at pressure equal to 3,000 meters, in what was described as a, quote, catastrophic failure. Electro Impact recommended a process called multi-curing, which would fix the problems of having wrinkles in the fiber. This required laying a few inches of the carbon material at a time, then sending the hull to cure, then repeating this process until the entire hull was completed. Stockton Rush refused this process, citing increased cost. No further tests were conducted on scale models, and Rush moved forward with construction of the full-sized hull. This decision did not sit well with what remained of OceanGate's engineers. Project manager and submersible pilot Emily Hammermeister said she would not bolt anyone into the sub. She resigned from OceanGate in September of 2020, citing a lack of safety protocols. Electro Impact began manufacturing the full-sized hull for Titan in the winter of 2020. In February of 2021, the original titanium domes and coupling rings from the first version of Titan were sent to Electro Impact and attached to the new hull. Rush firmly objected to manufacturing new titanium domes and coupling rings, once again due to cost. The entire hull, with its titanium domes included, were transported to the Deep Ocean Testing Facility in Maryland, where it reached a maximum pressure equating to 4,200 meters. Between April 29th and May 25th, 2021, OceanGate conducted a total of 11 test dives in Puget Sound, with the deepest dive reaching a depth of 170 meters. Maintenance logs from these dives resulted in 57 issues that required corrective action. The new Titan hull was based on a scale model design that did not withstand pressures at Titanic depth. The rebuilt Titan was never tested in actual deepwater conditions before being put into service for the Titanic missions, with people on board, including paying customers. After several years of delays, and with OceanGate desperately needing revenue, Titan was put on a truck for St. John's, Newfoundland, its departure point for its first Titanic expedition. Stockton Rush would pilot this mission himself, with mission specialists paying $125,000 per person. On June 30th, 2021, the first Titanic dive was attempted, but it aborted after reaching just 7 meters due to an electronics failure. After being towed back to the support vessel, its 3,000-pound titanium forward dome sheared off while the sub was being pulled up onto a ramp. It was determined that because of the pitching and rolling of the ship and the angle of the ramp, a force was exerted on the dome of Titan, causing it to snap the 4 bolts that attached the dome to the hull. The dome was intended to use 18 bolts to attach to the coupling ring, but Stockton Rush had previously decided to use only 4 bolts so it would be quicker to get the crew in and out of the sub. He reasoned that once underwater and under pressure, the domes would be firmly in place and did not need 18 bolts. Following this incident, all 18 bolts were used to hold the forward dome in place. The 2021 expedition continued over the next month, and on July 9th, during dive number 63, Titan reached a depth of 3,840 meters, Titanic depth. On board was famed French deep-sea explorer and Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, who would go on many dives aboard Titan over 3 years. Titan skirted in and out around the debris field of the Titanic wreck. However, a problem arose when its drop weights failed to release when attempting to ascend. These are external weights that, when dropped, allow the vessel to return to the surface. After troubleshooting the problems, the crew was able to rewire the electronics to release enough weight for Titan to resurface. In later testimony, OceanGate Director of Logistics and Quality Assurance Scott Griffith, who was also the co-pilot during this dive, told the U.S. Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation that he, quote, heard what I thought was what Stockton had described as the sound of the carbon fiber cracking, as a slap of the ruler on the table, and I heard a sound related to that on one dive at depth, but that was the only one incident of that. Despite the problems, OceanGate issued a press release on July 13, 2021, announcing they had made the 3,800-meter dive to the Titanic wreck site. Included in the release was a statement from Stockton Rush, reading, "We had to overcome tremendous engineering, operational, business, and finally COVID-19 challenges to get here, and I am so proud of this team and grateful for the support of our many partners." Stockton Rush often touted OceanGate's partnerships with Boeing, NASA, and the University of Washington Applied Physics Lab. This was a vast overstatement at best, apparently to bolster OceanGate's reputation and attract customers to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to reserve a dive on Titan. In 2020, NASA provided advisory support and technical consultation on composite materials and manufacturing processes related to carbon fiber construction. No design, construction, engineering, or testing was done by NASA engineers, and NASA facilities were never used by OceanGate. Boeing engineers assisted with early designs for a carbon fiber hull, but they warned Rush of potential catastrophic problems with using the material in the high-pressure environment of deep ocean exploration. Boeing has made it clear that it was not a partner on the Titan submersible and did not design, engineer, or build the sub. The University of Washington Applied Physics Lab only collaborated with OceanGate on initial designs, and OceanGate contracted for the use of APL's pressure testing lab. UW engineers did not analyze or verify any results from that testing. The University of Washington has publicly stated, despite early marketing claims by OceanGate, the APL was not involved in the Titan project, and that its earlier work was entirely separate from the deep ocean Titan development. Dive number 65 took place on July 19th, with Stockton Rush again piloting the vessel. Also on board were a co-pilot, a researcher from the University of Rhode Island, and 2 mission specialists. Titan reached a depth of 3,500 meters, but again experienced a problem with the drop weights. Rush attempted to use Titan's thrusters to return to the surface, but this very quickly depleted the vessel's battery power at 3,300 meters. Their situation was communicated to the support team above on board the vessel Horizon Arctic via a text-based chat system. Rush inquired about the temperature at Titanic depth, as he was considering returning to the bottom and waiting 24 hours until the emergency squibs would automatically release the drop weights. On the surface, Mission Director Kyle Bingham instructed Rush to release the entire drop weight tray, which would then allow Titan to resurface. Rush did not want to do this, as it would mean Titan would be unable to make any further dives on this expedition. He wanted to wait 24 hours at the bottom of the sea until the squibs released the weights. Bingham was later told by another crew member on the sub, quote, Stockton went around to each passenger or mission specialist and he said, "Are you willing to stay down here for 24 hours? Because if you don't, the company's going out of business." So he pressured those people to say yes. The only person who, from my understanding, said no was the co-pilot. And he basically texted up to us saying, "I'm done. Call my wife, tell her, get me a plane ticket, because when I get back up, I'm quitting." For the next 3.5 hours, Titan's crew worked on a solution while they descended to the bottom, and ultimately were able to manipulate the hydraulic pump for the drop weight tray just enough to release a portion of the weights, and Titan resurfaced without sacrificing the entire tray. After returning to St. John's, the co-pilot, whose name was redacted in official reports, departed the expedition and did not take part in any future dive missions. 11 dives were made during the 2021 Titanic expedition, with 6 of them reaching Titanic depth. 72 maintenance issues were logged, and 6 incident reports were recorded, including the forward dome falling off, 2 instances of drop weight failures, a valve set in the wrong position, and an electrical fire. Nevertheless, this was a huge success for OceanGate, and the company received much praise and positive media attention. OceanGate then announced its 2022 expedition, and urged aspiring mission specialists to contact OceanGate. Rather than return Titan to OceanGate headquarters in Everett, Washington, Rush chose to take the sub on a 7-month publicity tour. Titan made stops at educational institutions, country clubs, and adventure clubs, including the University of Rhode Island and the Princeton Club in Lake Forest, Illinois. This did not sit well with Director of Engineering Dan Scoville, who later testified, "They were going to bring the sub back in March, and we're going to have April, May, and we're going to be gone by June. So that gives us 8 weeks to fix the sub instead of the 9 months that we should probably have." Scoville was then fired as Director of Engineering in the fall of 2021 and replaced by Phil Brooks, who had been a software engineer at OceanGate. In the spring of 2021, Expedition Discovery host Josh Gates visited OceanGate in Everett to film an episode about the Titan Submersible. During a shallow test dive in Puget Sound, the sub was plagued with problems with just about everything, causing the dive to be cut short. Upon reaching the surface, Gates informed the president of the network that he was canceling the episode, adding, "This is a mistake. Something bad is going to happen here." The 2022 Titanic expedition season began on June 16th, once again departing from St. John's, Newfoundland, and using the Horizon Arctic as its support vessel. CBS News correspondent David Pogue was on board the expedition to do a story about OceanGate and the Titan sub. He and a CBS producer intended to reach the Titanic wreck, but the dive was scrubbed after reaching just 37 feet. Ultimately, Pogue's story included details of his experience, described the features of Titan's equipment, and an interview with Stockton Rush, but he did not get to see the wreck of the Titanic. Stockton Rush ultimately was not happy with what CBS had produced, believing it cast OceanGate in a poor light. The 2022 expedition experienced ups and downs, including damage to the sub, team members contracting COVID-19, bad weather, and some fairly distressing moments. On July 15, 2022, Titan embarked on dive number 80 with Scott Griffith as pilot, P.H. Nargeolet as the content expert, and 3 paying mission specialists on board. While exploring the Titanic wreckage, the sub became entangled in Titanic's grand staircase. Alfred Hagen, one of the mission specialists on Dive 80, later testified,
"We kind of descended a little bit into the grand staircase because the skylight was gone. And so we saw all the normal iconic sites, and I wanted to investigate the area of the rupture. And I asked PH to get back. And of course, there's a lot of current swirling around, and we briefly got stuck. It was just like pipes and things, and PH very quickly. When I say stuck, we weren't stuck. I doubt if it was more than a minute or two, and we were definitely stuck. Yeah.
And just to clarify, the Titan was entangled with the wreckage of the Titanic. Would that be accurate?
Yes. Well, we were ascending, and I don't recall the depth. I think we were fairly close to the surface, but we were water, and there was just a a large bang or cracking sound. And of course, sonic events in a submersible are alarming, so we were all concerned that maybe there was a crack in the hull.
A post-dive evaluation on Titan took place, and it was determined that the vessel had shifted within its metal frame, causing the loud bang. This evaluation did not include removing the insert to visually examine its integrity. At a debriefing meeting the following morning, a mission specialist expressed concern over the loud bang that she heard on the sub. According to OceanGate contractor Antonella Wilby, a robotics engineer and experienced submersible pilot, Stockton Rush brushed this concern aside. In her testimony to the Marine Board of Investigation, Wilby stated that Rush, quote, "just sort of, I felt, brushed it aside. He said it was probably just the sled banging against the frame, and then, oh well, deep-sea vehicles just make lots of noise due to pressure changes." Wilby brought her concerns to Director of Administration Amber Bay, who told Wilby, "Yes, many people are concerned about you. You don't seem to have an explorer mindset," adding that Wilby had a, quote, "bad attitude." Wilby then spoke to Director of Engineering Phil Brooks, who explained that Titan's hull only shifted a few microns, and that the expedition would continue as planned. Amber Bay offered to send Wilby home, and Wilby resigned from her contractor position at OceanGate and left the following day. Dive 81 took place a few days later on July 19th. During this dive, pilot Scott Griffith was heard to say, "There's something wrong with my thruster." Titan's thrusters had been mounted improperly, with one pointing in the wrong direction, causing the vessel to go in circles. Griffith was forced to take Titan to the bottom and wait while Stockton Rush came up with a solution on the support vessel. Passenger Renetta Rojas later told the BBC, "I was thinking, we're not going to make it." Hours later, Griffith was told to turn the off-the-shelf wireless game controller upside down and operate the controls in reverse. Griffith did this, and Titan was able to return to the surface. 7 of 13 dives during the 2022 expedition reached Titanic depth, and OceanGate succeeded in giving some of its mission specialists excellent views of the Titanic. However, the acoustic monitoring of the hull recorded 120 incidents per sensor, and the maintenance log documented 48 maintenance issues and 2 incidents. Some of these were minor, but every acoustic event recorded translates into a carbon fiber breaking. Unlike in 2021, the Titan submersible and its associated equipment were not shipped back to Everett, Washington for the winter. Instead, it was left in St. John's, Newfoundland. From July 26, 2022 until February 6, 2023, the Titan submersible was stored outdoors in a parking lot at a seaside facility. It was completely unprotected from the elements during the Canadian winter. Director of Engineering Phil Brooks was frustrated by this decision.
The cost of shipping it back was prohibitive. They were low on money, and so we couldn't do that. And really, that was basically around the time that I left. That it gotten quite frustrated with some of these issues and had decided to leave the company.
So to confirm, Stockton was aware of the concerns of this loud bang?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
In an interview with Netflix, former Director of Engineering Tony Neeson said, "I told Stockton, don't do that. Once we build this, it cannot be stored in sub-zero. It cannot go freezing. If water gets in there and you sit it out in freezing conditions and that water expands, it breaks fibers. With 100% certainty, that sub could not go freezing." During its time stored outdoors in St. John's, the Titan sub experienced a high of 29 degrees Celsius and a low of negative 17 degrees. In Fahrenheit, that is 84 degrees and 1.4 degrees respectively. Titan was exposed to freezing temperatures for the majority of November, December, and January before being moved indoors to the Marine Institute at Memorial University of Newfoundland. As the 2023 Titanic expedition season approached, OceanGate received an influx of money from investors, with the largest chunk, $1.85 million, coming from Stockton Rush himself. At the same time, OceanGate employees were asked to delay their salaries to a future time. Former Director of Engineering Phil Brooks stated,
There were economic issues with the company asking us to forego getting paid for periods of time with the promise that they would get us caught up in paychecks after the first of the year. They asked for volunteers, and I don't think anybody did it, but it was clear that the company was economically very stressed, and as a result, that they were making decisions and doing things that resulted in, I felt that the safety was just being compromised way too much. I just did not think, it just did not feel right, for them to be going. And like I said, I had suggested that they not go, and I was told that wasn't possible, that they had people that paid, and that they had to go through with it. So that was the reason that I left.
On May 12th, OceanGate's 2023 expedition season got underway. The support vessel used the prior 2 years, the Horizon Arctic, was unavailable. The company instead hired the Polar Prince, a former Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker that had been converted into a research vessel after being retired from service in 1986. The Polar Prince had less deck space than Horizon Arctic, and OceanGate was forced to make design changes to the LARS, or its launch and recovery system, so it and Titan could be towed behind instead of being transported on the deck. On May 24th, while en route to the Titanic from St. John's, the rough seas and large waves caused significant problems. Editor-in-chief of Travel Weekly, Arnie Weissman, was taking part in the mission and described what he saw. When the seas were most active and fog was the thickest, a near disaster for the sub and platform occurred. At the end of the rope that linked the stern of the ship to the platform, we saw that the front of the platform and the sub were underwater. As OceanGate crew and divers worked on the platform, Weissman spoke directly with Stockton Rush, saying, "When I asked him how much jeopardy the sub was in, he joked, 'So a sub is underwater, why is that a problem?'" The following day, Polar Prince returned to St. John's with the Lars and Titan in tow, where a damage assessment took place. Stockton Rush told expedition members that there were some concerns about communications and an adapter, but that's about it. With the weather still causing problems, Rush was determined to get a dive in. Dives 85, 86, and 87 took place off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, which were all aborted. At the conclusion of Dive 87, problems with the Lars platform caused a delay, resulting in Titan's bow to repeatedly be lifted by swells and slammed back down. Mission specialists described it as very jarring. They added, Stockton Rush was antsy and clearly frustrated and recalled him saying, "I'm going to get a dive in, even if it kills me." During a debriefing the following day, mission specialists pressed their concerns about the hull taking a beating on the water during the aborted dive. Rush replied by saying the hull is practically indestructible, completely safe, and that he had no concerns whatsoever. Multiple witnesses later told the Marine Board of Investigation that no incident report was logged about this, and no post-dive inspection was done on Titan or the Lars. The Coast Guard was unable to locate any records regarding Dive 87. On June 16th, the Polar Prince departed St. John's, towing the Lars and Titan 370 nautical miles to the Titanic wreck site. On June 18th, Titan prepared for its final, fateful voyage. On board were Stockton Rush, who operated the sub, content expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and 3 paying passengers: British adventurer Hamish Harding, British-Pakistani billionaire Shahzada Dawood, and his son, 19-year-old Suleman Dawood. At 9:14 a.m., Titan was disengaged from the Lars and began its dive. It was normal for Titan to maneuver in shallow water to test communications prior to descending, but Rush did not perform this test on this dive. Wendy Rush, Stockton's wife and OceanGate's director of communications, was on board the Polar Prince monitoring communications from Titan and its location. At 9:43 a.m., communication via its text-based messaging system was lost. Multiple messages were sent from Polar Prince, and finally at 10:08 a.m., the message K was received from Titan, indicating a communications check. At 10:47 a.m., Titan had reached 3,341 meters, and reported it had dropped 2 of its ballast weights to slow its descent, normal procedure. 6 seconds later, an automated message was sent by Titan, recording its position and depth of 3,346.28 meters. 2 seconds after receiving this message, a loud, low rumbling bang was heard by the crew of the Polar Prince. Here's a recording of that sound. It is difficult to hear. Titan disappeared from the tracking system, and all communications were lost. Throughout the day, the operations team on the Polar Prince conducted its standard missed communication protocols in an attempt to reach Titan. As of 3 p.m., Titan was officially missing, and the Polar Prince crew contacted the Canadian Coast Guard to report Titan was in distress. However, they were advised that their location was in the jurisdiction of the U.S. Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center in Boston, and the call was patched through. Coast Guard personnel in Boston initiated a multinational rescue operation, deeming Titan and its occupants to be in grave or imminent danger. 11 vessels and 4 aircraft searched 12,145 square nautical miles of ocean for possible survivors and debris from Titan. The search and rescue response for Titan was called unprecedented by the Coast Guard's After Action Report Board. On June 22, 2023, at 8:40 a.m., the remotely operated vessel Odysseus from Pelagic Research Services discovered the Titan's tail cone, titanium dome, and coupling ring, as well as other scattered debris of the Titan on the seafloor. This provided search and rescue personnel conclusive evidence of the instantaneous and catastrophic implosion of Titan and the death of all 5 people on board. Video footage of this discovery is chilling. No Mayday message or other distress calls were ever sent by Titan. Those still involved with OceanGate were shocked, stunned, and saddened by the loss. Former employees mourned, but most fully expected something like this would happen eventually. News of Titan's failure rippled around the world like a shockwave. The once highly touted submersible that took paying customers to see the Titanic had suffered a similar fate as the legendary ship. Early jokes about naming the vessel Titan were suddenly no longer funny. Response from the general public ranged from sadness to outrage. OceanGate's first official statement following the loss of Titan reads, in part, "This is an extremely sad time for our dedicated employees, who are exhausted and grieving deeply over this loss. The entire OceanGate family is deeply grateful for the countless men and women from multiple organizations of the international community who expedited wide-ranging resources and have worked so very hard on this mission. This is a very sad time for the entire explorer community, and for each of the family members of those lost at sea. We respectfully ask that the privacy of these families be respected during this most painful time." Just days after the incident, the Deputy Commandant of U.S. Coast Guard Operations issued an order for a Marine Board of Investigation to examine the loss of Titan. The board was headed by Mr. Jason Neubauer of the Coast Guard's Office of Investigations and Casualty Analysis. Evidence collection was a joint effort in conjunction with the National Transportation Safety Board. Multiple other federal agencies were involved in the investigation, including the FBI. The United Kingdom, Canada, and France were named as substantially interested states, according to International Maritime Organization protocols, and were also involved in the investigation. A public hearing was held in September of 2023, during which 26 witnesses gave testimony over 9 days. Key witnesses included former OceanGate employees Tony Neeson, Phil Brooks, David Lockridge, OceanGate contractor Tim Catterson, American Bureau of Shipping Senior Principal Engineer Roy Thomas, NTSB engineer Don Kramer, and owner of the Roatan Institute of Deep Sea Exploration, Carl Stanley. During the hearings, Stanley gave passionate testimony regarding the unknown danger he had been in during Titan test dives. You heard a portion of that testimony at the top of this episode. Many others gave similar testimony, including David Lockridge, who was not employed by OceanGate at the time of Titan's loss. However, his testimony described the company's lax safety culture.
That meeting turned out to be a 2-hour, 10-minute discussion on my termination and how my disagreements with the organisation with regards to safety didn't matter. This report, I was asked to do it. Now, if it had been a case of the report, I hadn't been asked to do an inspection of it, I would have done one. You know, I mean, that built Titan sub was weeks away from getting handed off to myself. And through that whole build process, seeing all those components, I was appalled. So either way, whether I did a report on the 18th of January or whether I did a report, say it was March, it was going to be ready, whatever, I would have on paper put down my concerns because I was dismissed on every single occasion, from Chief Operating Officer, CEO, even the media and marketing manager, all of them, engineering director, a lot of them. The only other director that agreed with me on my concerns was Bonnie. That was it. The contractors that were working for me, Tim Catterson and Chris Imes, voiced their concerns. You heard Tim yesterday state to you that he would never get in that sub. Chris told him he would never get in that sub. Now, Tim's probably got 30, 40 years of experience in subs. Chris Imes ran Delta submarines for 20 plus years. You know, at one point he'd probably done more dives than anybody else in the industry. They refused to dive the sub. They voiced their concerns. It wasn't just me. Other people did, and they were dismissed. They were dismissed by Tony. They were dismissed by the CEO. I would never have got in that thing. From the get-go, Tony Nissen, engineering director, gave me zero confidence in a product that I personally was supposed to be the chief pilot for or have under my care as a director of marine operations. Hands down, I would never go in that thing, and I wouldn't have.
The Marine Board of Investigation Marine Casualty Report was published on August 4th, 2025. As described in the narrative you heard throughout this series, the investigation uncovered a long history of wide-ranging problems associated with OceanGate and the Titan submersible. The 335-page document thoroughly describes the history of the project, details of all the vessels involved, dive logs, maps, witness statements, and its conclusions and recommendations. In summary, the MBI wrote, OceanGate's failure to follow established engineering protocols for safety, testing, and maintenance of their submersible was the primary causal factor, with the event initiating the loss being the loss of structural integrity of the Titan's carbon fiber hull. This loss of structural integrity caused the sudden catastrophic implosion of the hull. Many failures by OceanGate were outlined in the Coast Guard's Marine Casualty Report. This is an extremely long list, but in short, these include design and test procedures that did not address fundamental engineering principles, no meaningful analysis to determine the life cycle of the hull, an over-reliance on its acoustic monitoring system to gauge hull integrity, failure to interpret the monitoring system data after problematic events, failure to inspect hull integrity after significant incidents and lacking even procedures to do so, failure to conduct crucial testing, and a toxic corporate culture. The Coast Guard was heavily critical of OceanGate's operations, saying the company suffered from severe financial instability, high employee turnover, and a lack of professionally qualified staff, which critically undermined its ability to maintain safety and operational integrity, calling the loss of Titan a preventable tragedy. The report goes on to cite Stockton Rush personally for misrepresenting partnerships and certifications to skirt regulations, misrepresenting Titan's safety record with false data, misleading paying customers regarding testing procedures, and exaggerating the number of tests done on Titan's final carbon fiber hull. According to the Coast Guard, Stockton Rush would have been referred to the Department of Justice had he survived, for negligence resulting in the deaths of 4 passengers. In conclusion, and I don't often do this, but I want to offer my personal perspective. I have researched countless shipwrecks and pored over hundreds of witness statements and accident reports. I have never been so infuriated and appalled while writing an episode for this podcast. I have never before read of such incredible negligence, willful misrepresentation of truth, shocking ignorance of safety protocols, and endangerment of human lives, including his own. Some have labeled Stockton Rush as arrogant, spoiled, narcissistic, and vain. Perhaps and likely he was all of those things, at least to some people. James Cameron, the film director, who had been on dives to the Titanic over 30 times, was saddened by the loss of Titan, but had his concerns all along about the carbon fiber, calling it a horrible idea, adding, We all knew that the danger was delamination and progressive failure over time with microscopic water ingress, what they call cycling fatigue. And we knew if the sub passed its pressure test, it wasn't going to fail on its first dive, but it's going to fail over time, which is insidious. You don't get that with steel or titanium. Expedition Discovery host Josh Gates labeled Stockton Rush as a salesman. Rush was charismatic and could be charming, and much like a salesman, he often said whatever was necessary to produce a positive result for him in OceanGate. He surrounded himself with people who would tell him yes, and anyone who did not wasn't around very long. This is a sign of ineffective leadership in any industry, and in the case of OceanGate, people's lives were at risk. The Silicon Valley trope of move fast and break things is perfectly fine in many cases, and innovation requires forward thinking and accepting risk. Stockton Rush accepted risk to a fault and put others at risk as a result. Much like the case of Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos, Rush had a pattern for misrepresenting facts and reckless disregard for safety that resulted in the deaths of 5 people, including himself, when the Titan submersible imploded on June 18, 2023. In a 2021 interview, Rush quipped to reporters, "I'd like to be remembered as an innovator. I think it was General Douglas MacArthur who said, 'You're remembered for the rules you break.' And I've broken some rules to make this. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me." In the end, Stockton Rush is, in fact, remembered for the rules he broke. But he is not remembered for logic and good engineering. So many warned Stockton Rush that a failure could happen, even that it was probable. Whether it was his hubris, desire for financial gain, or fame, or to make history like his ancestors, Stockton Rush will be remembered now for his failure. The families that are left behind have grieved, and will no doubt continue to do so, and they will endure knowing this tragedy was entirely preventable. The vast majority of research done for this series comes from the report of the Marine Board of Investigation into the implosion of the submersible Titan by the United States Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation, and Hull Failure and Implosion of Submersible Titan from the National Transportation Safety Board. I have read every word of both these documents, several hundred pages, and they are filled with details that give a fascinating and frustrating look into OceanGate operations and Stockton Rush. These documents are available on this episode's page at shipwrecksandseadogs.com or directly through each agency's website. That's going to do it for the OceanGate Titan Submersible, a preventable tragedy. Thank you so much for listening to this series. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, edited, and produced by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried. For ad-free listening, please subscribe at patreon.com/shipwreckspod. Now with 3 tiers to choose from, starting at just $5 a month. All tiers get ad-free episodes and bonus episodes with different perks for joining. Go to patreon.com/shipwreckspod to subscribe. You can also join the Officers Club now directly through Apple Podcasts for just $4.99 a month. Simply find Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on Apple Podcasts and click the banner to subscribe. Last but not least, please be sure to rate and review Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please join me again next time. And as always, don't forget to wear your